Welcome to Church Media HQ. My name is Luke Clayton, your host. Today, we're having a conversation with Drew Schettler. Drew is the creator of Meridiem Films. He's a gifted storyteller and filmmaker. He's got a lot of insight on the power of story and video. I think you're really going to enjoy this episode. So let's get right to the conversation with Drew. I think too many times the Christians' reaction to Hollywood is, we're done with Hollywood. We're not going to watch their movies. We're not going to give them our money. And maybe there's a place for that at times. But the truth is that I'm not saying stop consuming that stuff, but have a part in creating stuff that you do agree in, have a part in contributing to content that does line up with your values and, is something that, you can get behind. And I think that's so much better. It's so much better to contribute to the creation of something than to just sit around and, complain about the stuff you don't like.
Right.
A little bit of a soapbox there, but thanks for letting me have it.
Yeah, and I think that's what I've been advocating is that the church getting more involved with art in general, but specifically filmmaking. And this is why is because you can, I'm all for graphics and design. I mean, if you compare it to decor in your house, that you have curtains and a couch and something, you want to design it to a certain specification that is nice, that when you come home, you feel at home. And so when you have a media graphic or you design your church a certain way, there's an aspect of beauty that is in relation to the glory of God. So you want excellence compared to excellence. But when it comes to film, there's something different there because it's not just excellence. You're conveying a message, you're sharing a message. And although Hollywood is an entertainment industry, so you're looking just to find leisure or just sort of a suspension from your reality or just something to enjoy, you also are getting influenced by a worldview. And so if Hollywood has an agenda or has a message, whether good or bad, you will be influenced by it if you consume it. So I advocate that the church should invest in some way or another, much as you do, support missionaries or church planners to support filmmakers or endeavors like this. And you can vet them and make sure they're going to be using the funds in the right way, that they're good at what they do. But I advocate this to get more films that tell the message of truth, that really shift the mindset to a biblical worldview. We'll never win the world, so to speak. There will always be the world will hate us, but people represent the world. So we're trying to convey a message to people, not the world in general. We're not trying to really, like, if a Christian film ever made it to the Golden Globes or the Academy, who cares? That's not a goal. That's not
Absolutely.
What we're trying to achieve. And that could be one day, or that could be something really cool. But the goal is to really affect people's perspective of life, perspective of the existence of God and of sexuality, of violence and law and order. All this, there's so many things that as Christians, you learn things in Sunday school or you go to church and you're getting something from the Bible. It's the roadmap to our life and how we relate to God on this earth. And so if you can convey that through a film, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, or a 2-hour long movie, then why not? Let's do this. And we've already seen success with the Irwin brothers, the Kendrick brothers, the Chosen, and different measures of it. You may not agree with how they do it. You may love a certain film and not another one. But the point is, we just need more content like this.
Yep.
And to shift the mindset of a church to not just be within your walls and just to do things conventionally, like this is how we raise funds to evangelize our world, but instead looking at aspects that our culture is utterly consumed with their phone, with a device, with screen time, with movies. So why not use something that could be maybe entertaining, but also changing a perspective? And then from that platform, now people are more welcoming to a conversation about God in the Bible.
Mhm.
Maybe I don't know if the word welcoming is right, but you're having a conversation with them, with characters that you've developed on a screenplay. You're having that conversation before they ever enter your church, and that's powerful.
Yeah.
And that to me is something to wor- worthy of noting, and to pray about and to consider how can we affect our culture around us through this medium called storytelling, filmmaking.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, yeah, and something to keep in mind. I got to be careful the way I say this because I'm sure it'll be received or perceived in an incorrect light. Because I'm not trying to minimalize or belittle the effort of like you said, church planting, missionaries, or anything like that. That is all great, and that's all good, and that needs to go on. But you kind of said this earlier. When you invest into that, and of course there's eternal, the Bible talks about fruit that remains, and there's eternal rewards associated with that, and you're impacting lives and whatever, and that's all good. And so I'm saying this disclaimer, I'm not saying stop doing that, but when you invest into a film, something that is telling a story, like something that we've produced, something that Drew produces, then again, that is timeless. It's going to be essentially on record somewhere forever. And it doesn't matter. And it's so much, it's very much, it can be distributed, you know, everywhere, countless amounts of times. There is no limit to how many views, for example, you could have on YouTube, or how many times it could be downloaded, or whatever it may be. And so what I'm saying is, when you invest in something like that, you are definitely investing in something that is going to have, for sure, even on this earth, if you will, some form of eternal impact, in that, as long as this
Mhm.
the world is around us, we know it, this film will be able to be viewed and will be able to be watched. And it's so much quicker to, for example, take like, because we were talking about The Chosen. I love what The Chosen is doing, is they are taking their content, which is of course originally shot in the English language, and they're taking it and they're having it translated, and they're doing voiceover so that it can go into all these multiple different languages, and they're
Mhm.
distributing the message, the story of Jesus Christ, done through the medium of film, all across the world, to all different language and people groups. And that
Right.
is something that is so much, can be done so much quicker than physically sending people across the
Mhm.
world, to, and that needs to happen as well. But it's so much quicker, so much more
Yeah.
streamlined to be able to do it in this way. And so again, this is a completely different perspective. I understand. It's not that, I understand we're kind of equivocating some of this to even something that maybe a church deems in a missions department, but this is a mission, and it is something that gets the
Mhm.
the gospel message out there. And so I think it's so important. And so again, if there's church leaders out there that this kind of interest you, like, get behind guys like Drew and help them out as they continue to tell stories. Because Drew, again, I mean, Drew is a gifted storyteller, and he's written and got a gift for writing, directing, film editing, all of the above, if you will. And he's the kind of guy you want to get behind there. Um, so yeah, so much there, and I could go on about that all day. So when it comes to the idea, though, of let's dive into that story a little bit. Like, I keep saying, I do, and I believe it, you're a great writer, a great storyteller. So let's dive into that a little bit. What is kind of this is a broad question, so we'll start broad and go more narrow as we go along here. But what is kind of your philosophy, if you will, mentality, when you're approaching a story? Say, hey, it's time to write a new script. How does that process work for you?
Yeah, I think there's a practical process and then more philosophical one of those points. I think you start with a goal in
Mhm.
mind. You have to have the end point, not the end of the story, but you have to know where you're trying to lead people. And I think we start with that. We start with a theme.
Mhm.
And for the last one, to use that example, is it was the broken to beauty, and so we had that theme. And then when that's your goal, and it has to, okay, how is it going to relate to Christmas and all of that, trying to, if that's what, whether it's Easter or Christmas. And when you look at the story of Christmas and Easter, there's so much more than what we just maybe attribute to it. I remember growing up, we would, read through the Christmas story before we opened presents, and it was amazing how every time we read the Christmas story, every year there was always something different that we found out about the story of Christmas. And so I think there's something fresh and new that you can bring with a different story. You don't always have to do the traditional nativity story, is what I mean. It doesn't always have to be a baby born in some sort of metaphor with that. It can be it could be something entirely different, but yet it relates to it. And so you, as the writer, director, or producer, you have to see, how does this connect with that message? What's our goal? What's our theme? And then I know a lot, traditional brainstorming, and I've heard a lot of screenwriters talk about how they format their story and screenplay. Is they're writing some things they want in the story. Like they want a car accident. They want an explosion. They want someone gets bit by a snake. Someone gets stranded on an island. And you're like, okay, well, how do all these things come together? And a lot of times you start with these big rocks. But for me, maybe it's not action based, maybe it's a relational based. And I personally was thinking through this story, and I wanted maybe a father who had some sort of immense amount of emotional weight and doubts that he had. So, write that down. Okay, how's that going to connect? And I wanted the daughter to have some sort of physical handicap that related to that. And then the mom had some sort of, either she passed away or she completely left the family somehow. And so you're starting with these sort of big rocks, and then you're connecting the dots. So you do some brainstorming, you write that down, and you do a lot of thinking. Everyone has their own process. I like to sit and drive. I like driving from A to B, like long road trips. I have a long commute from my house to church. It's about 45 minutes. And so I'll just sit and think and think and think. And I think thinking is probably the best thing you could do for your story. Is almost, I know, again, a lot of other screenwriters, they will think through every aspect of the story before they write down a word on a page. They'll think, and they don't have the story literally written, but they've got it written in their heads. And they think of the motives of the characters, why they would do certain things. And I heard a guy say that it takes a lot of time before I put pen to paper, but once I do, that percentage of time attributed to creating the story is much smaller than the whole brainstorming or process to develop it. And so from there, we're writing a story, an outline, and then you're just writing. On a practical note, I use a program called Studio Binder. There's I think it's called Celtex or something.
Yeah. Celtic, Celtics. I've heard it pronounced both ways, but I know what you're talking about.
There's all sorts of ones, and that's what I use, Studio Binder. It's just a simple screenwriting software, and it kind of formats it, helps format, and that's something to learn to help your screenplay and how to have slug lines or action lines. And writing a screenplay is different than writing a book, and that's hard for me. They use this phrase that you say to keep in your mind when you're writing a screenplay is show, don't tell. And you don't want to explain a situation. You want to show what they're doing in action. So you're not talking about the blue ribbon that the woman is wearing. So with her long blonde curly hair and the blue ribbon around her neck, you don't explain anything. You just show it in action. And so that's a different formatting of writing, and it's kind of hard to do. But screenplays can be very detailed in the sense that I've seen some screenwriters, here's a side note. What's really cool, you can type in any movie, and at the end of it, type in a screenplay, and it'll come up the PDF, and you can watch. Like if you just watch a movie, go watch or read their screenplay, and it's amazing how sometimes ambiguous it is. And you're like, how did takes a lot of imagination, a lot of parties, collaboration, studying, preparation, to going through. Christopher Nolan, who's the most complex filmmaker out there, one of them, his screenplays are very ambiguous. They're not very detailed. And I think a lot of their actors say, I didn't really understand the screenplay. I had to ask a lot of questions. And then I've seen some that are very, very detailed. and they don't stray away from the script at all, and it's pretty incredible. So there's all sorts of methods with that. I'm not sure if that answers your question. That I talked mainly about
Oh, no, no.
screenwriting.
Yeah, a lot of good
Um,
stuff. You were talking about, I want to kind of chase your rabbit there a minute about the screenplay thing, about how you can Google and basically pull up any
yeah,
screenplay. There
yeah.
is I can't remember what it's called. I've seen it on Facebook a couple times. But basically this video, this, I don't know, this guy who makes videos, he goes through and he pulls like the scene from a show or from a movie, and then
Oh
he
yeah,
takes
and
like
has
the screenplay, and he's like
yeah.
actually got it scrolling and unfolding like
I've
in
seen
real
that.
time. And that is super cool because yeah, on the one hand, it's amazing to see how certain, writers and directors will keep, like you said, the script very open-ended, if you will, and ambiguous. But then on the other
Mhm.
hand, I've seen some that are actually, it's like, wow, how did you, like, I thought for sure that was something that was maybe improvised in the moment, but it was actually
Yeah,
something that was scripted. So it is really interesting. So circling back to a couple other things you said there. So you're talking about, you start with I think the term you used were like these big rocks that you want to kind of happen in the story. And that's kind of my approach as well. So my kind of formula has always been, I think of how, which is very obvious, like how I usually think about the ending. It's like, man, how do I want this thing to end? Because in my opinion, if your movie doesn't have a solid ending, if your story doesn't have a solid ending, it's really lackluster and kind of can make the whole thing, the whole film. It doesn't matter how good it was. If the ending wasn't good and it wasn't strong, then it doesn't stick with you. So I always think, how do I want this thing to end? And then, how do I want this thing to begin? And then, like you said, I do the same thing, like those big rocks, those, and I call them moments, and really, so you've got to have these kind of big moments that happen throughout the film, because that's what people take away. You've heard of there's a book out there called The Power of Moments and whatever. And that is, people don't remember, every detail of their life. They just remember moments. It's the same thing when they watch, a movie, or read a book or consume any type of story in that way. So
right.
those moments, and then you kind of connect the dots. So you say, okay, well, here's where we begin, and here's how we get to big moment one, and then here's how we get to big moment two, and so on and so forth. That for me has always been, it seems to be effective there. So yeah, we're talking about those power of moments, and then yeah, thinking and then writing. You experience the writer's block. That happens, I think, to everybody who tries to create
Yeah,
content in some way or another. But I do agree with what you said. The more thought you put into it, maybe even before you've got anything written, just kind of the quicker that, for me, that at least the quicker the writing process is when I actually get to that phase. Because yeah, I mean, I'm like you, I'll just let something just sit in my head for, you know, uh,
yeah,
weeks, months, and it's just like, hey,
let
I
it
just keep.
marinate.
Yeah, exactly. And then, I kind of put it all together. And some people, they're like, well, you better write it down because you might forget it. And occasionally, if there's something really good that I don't want to forget, that I'm like, okay, yeah, that is good. But to be honest with you, and I don't know if this is, I don't know if this is how most people are, but for me, if it's really good, I'm not forgetting it. You know what I'm saying? Like, I'm not, it's going to
Mhm.
stay there. And so, yeah, I think that's really important, is to just sit there and think. And I think that can go for anything in terms of content creation. We're talking about story
Yeah,
writing, but I even would say, if you're a pastor out there, I mean, when it comes to sermon, I mean, just thinking on it and dwelling on it, that can really help you, before you actually, put it on an outline form, or actually proclaim it from your pulpit, or whatnot.
yeah,
Yeah. And then another thing you talked about, avoiding, more or less avoiding the exposition to tell your story, which is really hard. It's a difference between, you said screenplay. I like the way you put it, show, not
oh
tell.
yeah, right.
And it can be really tempting. And you see this happen in movies. I mean, and
Mhm.
in scripts. I mean, you have to have some exposition to explain some things, some dialogue, more or less, that kind of, says, oh,
Yeah,
this is how this works. But anytime you can show it,
mhm.
and not actually have to, explain it through dialogue. It
Right.
is so much so much better. So now you anyway, so yeah, a lot of stuff I wanted to circle back to there and just say, yeah, like that's, I think that's really
Right.
good takeaways there. Um so you use you said, well, like I said, Celtics, I don't know, I've heard it pronounced both ways. And I do like that, how it works and kind of helps you. That's how I didn't really know the format of screenplay before
Mhm.
I opened up that program, you know. I mean, I'd seen them out there, but it was kind of like, oh, and
Yeah.
it actually is a really good software for you know, writing these stories and stuff. So with I guess getting back to some of the philosophy of the story, something I've noticed about yours, and some of them are different than others, but many of your films that you've made, they don't necessarily. Uh, it's not like there's a moment where the if you will, the main character or the villain, let's be as cheesy as possible, where the villain falls on his knees and says, what must I do to be saved, and the main character, you know, leads him to
Mhm.
Christ. Your stuff is very much more allegorical, which I think is great. And I think
Mhm.
we've talked about this before, but like, why do you take that approach in most
Mhm.
cases?
Yeah, and I think that's a good question, and I think, well, just to kind of preface something, is that a lot of times whatever we do in the church and we see something done well, or however it's done, and we say, it almost has to be mimicked that way, or kind of a carbon copy.
Hmm.
And that's not always the case. And I think when it comes specifically to art and this aspect of filmmaking and storytelling, I have a way that I like to share stories. That does not make Drew's way of storytelling the best way or the right way. In one sense, the right story is one that communicates. Anything else is okay, and that's what I've come to learn, is that um, storytelling is about delivering a message. You're communicating an idea, a truth about anything. And it could be something that personally, Hollywood, it's a truth they're communicating you don't agree with. And that's why we're doing what we're doing. But the
Hmm.
point is, good storytelling is communicating a point, a message. And so I like to take the approach of how the way I think is metaphorically and a lot of things. I think I don't do it intentionally. I do it inerrantly. That's just how I do stuff, and I communicate that way. And I value things more deeply when it comes to a metaphor. Now, when it comes to philosophically, why I would do that, or maybe why I tend to speak metaphorically in certain terms when I'm conveying a truth, is that sometimes truth, when it's delivered without any sort of dressing, I guess you could say, is that it's not palatable. And it's not that we're like, I mean, there is a truth, there is a heaven and a hell, there is a God,
Hmm.
Jesus, and
Yeah.
we are sinners. But if you're just conveying that truth to someone at the gas station, sometimes it's not palatable, it's not digestible, because you haven't bridged a relationship. So
Mm.
I like to use a story to bridge a relationship with characters and convey a message of truth that is more metaphorical in nature. Because I like to give the opportunity to someone who is watching that with a friend, who they want to share that message with, or maybe it's a pastor at their church, that they can make the understanding known, much how Jesus did. And why did Jesus tell stories? He says that I'm not speaking the plain truth to you because you wouldn't receive it any other way. And
Mhm.
I think we've become desensitized to just speaking overtly and plainly about things. I think there's definitely a case for speaking plainly and in with the gospel. And I'm not here just to say this is the only way, the right way, but I'm saying it's the way I like to do things. And to be honest, if someone approached me and I was an unbeliever who did not believe in the existence of God, felt um, that he was evil, he hated the world, why could he create all this suffering? If you were to confront me with the gospel, this is I make a story how I would want someone to give me the gospel. And I think
Mm.
that's important for every believer, is to really grasp the gospel of what that is, like doctrinally, theologically, to know what the gospel is, and then share that with your friends, your neighbors, your relatives, or your ministry in the way that God has created you to be. And this is how I do it. So there's some, I guess, practical reasons, maybe how it's a little more digestible to the culture, but it's also, I think, just how I do it. And sometimes I kind of root on the guys who maybe do it a little bit more boldly. I've been doing that more. I think we need to be more bold with our message. There is no reason not to, but I think there's a difference between being bold and being cheesy. And I
Exactly.
think
Yeah.
sometimes we've only seen boldness in a cheesy form. And I
Yeah.
think you can be bold in a tactful form.
Thanks again for joining us for this episode, and don't forget to subscribe. You can check the show notes and video description to learn more about products and services from Church Media HQ, as well as details about our guests and content contributors. Speaking of the content, if you find it helpful, please take a moment to leave us a 5-star review and share this episode with other church leaders like you. Also, be sure to check out our newest show, Connection Culture. This is available on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Church Media HQ is a production of the Must Increase Network. The show is edited and produced by Bo Snyder. The creator and executive producer is myself, Luke Clayton. And until next time, I want to remind you to try something new. Why? You know why. Because it's so much better to fail at trying the incredible than it is to succeed at simply doing the average. We'll see you next time right here on Church Media HQ.